welcome back for our fourth edition of our Iran series covering the ongoing geoeconomic implications of the conflict in Iran. We are joined here today again by Ioannis Koskinas, who is CEO of Hoplite Group, Hamlet Yousef, who's a national security investor and also part of our Irregular Warfare's economic warfare and legal group, and Tom Johansmeyer, who is the co-director of that same group. But this is our fourth point in the series, so I'd like to go around and just have Tom introduce himself and Hamlet and Ioannis to do the same. Just give us a little bit of context about who you are and what you're bringing to the conversation today. So Tom, let's start with you.
Thanks, Jackie. As you mentioned, I'm co-director of the Economic and Legal Warfare Group at the Irregular Warfare Initiative. In my spare time, I'm doing a PhD at the University of Kent and Canterbury, where I'm focused on economic security via cyber warfare. And I also, during the day, work in the reinsurance industry.
Perfect. Hamlet, let's hand it over to you.
Sure. Hamlet Yousef, one of the founders and managing partners of Iron Gate Capital Advisors. We're an early stage VC fund that invests at the intersection of technology, national security, and defense. Most of us are former intelligence, DoD, or national security officials. Also, as Jackie mentioned, an advisor to the Irregular Warfare Initiative. And full bias, I'm Iranian born and had left and fled post-revolution. So to say that I'm anti-regime would be an understatement.
Ioannis Koskinas. Hi, everybody. Ioannis Koskinas from by way of Hoplite Group, obviously. Now I'm the CEO of a company, and we focus on mostly government work. So whatever we say today is my opinion, not anybody else's. But we focus on understanding the environments. Mostly the premise to my orientation, not just the companies, is that I think as Americans we do great with our intentions, but sometimes we don't do so great when it comes to understanding the environments that we're going into. Thus the whole concept of doing even this show, I think is an important concept, and what the Irregular Warfare Institute initiative is doing in of itself. I spent 20 years in the military, mostly counterterrorism, and since the military, the last 15 years or so, has been Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, all the fun places that we've been involved in. So this is this area and this particular topic is near and dear to me.
All right, great. So we have a lot to unpack once again today. It was another very busy week. I think that there's a lot to cover in terms of where we left off last week. We went straight into the weekend where President Trump gave this 5-day grace period. And we are seeing a degree of traction perhaps when it comes to discussing ceasefires. But I'm curious if that's, let's start there. Let's start with where we're at now, and we can kind of retroactively cover what's gone on and the geoeconomic implications. Hamlet, let's start with you.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on where we are now? We've seen the markets flex. Where are we going?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think on both sides, you're probably looking at escalation to de-escalate. I think this is probably a pause, and everyone kind of catching their breaths before you have that next level of escalation and conflict. I think with us, the intent is pretty clear. The Arab nations have signaled it as well. To back off right now wouldn't make any sense. And I think the resources that we have in theater, the human resources that we're now moving in theater, to me, point to continued escalation. I don't think you're looking at a scenario where you're looking at an Iraq-style invasion and a march onto Iran. But I do see a scenario where the administration, the Israelis, are not going to relent on putting pressure on Iran, not only to degrade and decapitate regime leadership, hardline leadership, and the regime's capabilities and ability to wage kinetic conflict or traditional conflict in theater, but also start putting pressure on keeping the straits open. I think that's going to be a key point here, obviously. I know it's a topic we're going to get into. On the Iran side, I don't think there's any negotiating. I think the desired negotiated outcome of what the regime is believe they're destined to achieve is diametrically opposite of what the rest of the world will find acceptable. So I don't think there's any common ground with the current regime and their hardline mindset. It got into it in pretty good detail on a Substack I did on kind of the martyrdom mentality of the regime. So I think what they're going to continue to do is they're going to try to continue to use the Straits as a hostage in negotiating with the globe, basically trying to turn global sentiment against us. And unfortunately, I think they're going to continue to rely on what they do have, which is a never ending, but a network of irregular warfare options. Everything from attacking infrastructure in the region to further inciting proxies in the region and the West to act. So I don't see any let up in the near term.
Yeah, Johnny, this question is for you, and I think, Tom, this is something that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on as well. Is Johnny, you touched on this, and I think it was the first of this first part of the series, where you talked about Iran's ability to just go 5 rounds and how much that speaks to their strength, right? Like what that's saying to the rest of the world, and they're doing so with these asymmetric means and their economic warfare tactics, right? So, how do you think they're doing at this point? I mean, we've seen potentially, their impacts to the proxies, impacts to their ballistic missile arsenal, impacts to their ability to be that threshold state of nuclear capability. What else do you think they kind of have up their sleeve, and how long does that speak? How does that speak to how long they can stay in the fight?
Yes, I mean, it really does come down precisely to what Hamlet mentioned, which is the escalate to de-escalate. These things mean different things to us as they do to them. I think from our side, we look at escalation to de-escalate heavier bombing. We'll bomb them to hell if this doesn't, if they don't cooperate, if they don't go into a ceasefire, and our attempt is, or our intent is to actually maybe hit more targets, elevate, into infrastructure, really kind of sting them a little bit more. But from their perspective, they look at escalation to de-escalate as an act of desperation. For start, again, this is not me. I'm just saying this is how they view it. They look at it as an act that basically we don't have the time. The classic concept of, we have the watch, they have the time concept, and they look at it from the perspective of, because we don't have time, we're going to escalate. But if they just wither it, they're going to be able to come out on the other end. The other piece of it is they also look at escalation in asymmetric ways. We hit their power plants; they can't hit our power plant, in DC. So they'll hit power plants and desalination and other key infrastructure in the Gulf, to which that is a pain threshold that is, significantly higher for them than it is for us or even the region. Now, I don't think that they should underestimate the Gulf countries' resolve in this. I think that underestimating gets people in trouble. But there are other things that they can do. I mean, think about what we talked about last 3 times. It's not just the Strait of Hormuz that they're going to close. If the Houthis get involved, they might close the other strait by the Red Sea, and the Bab el-Mandab is another 12% of the world's throughput. And then again, you have other layers on top of that, sleeper cells. They've built up a lot of asymmetric capabilities around the world. So that hasn't been triggered yet. Maybe we built it up as if it's Iranian and the IRGC is 12 feet tall and they can take a punch. But I think that we shouldn't underestimate him again.
What I found interesting through this grace period, particularly with regard to critical infrastructure, is, to me, especially as a commercial guy, it looks like a pacing mechanism as well. If this conflict is going to end with some sort of negotiated solution, as most do, right? Even if that's not the stated objective today, you need to have time and trading material in order to negotiate. And an early strike, particularly if widespread on critical national infrastructure, takes a major collection of negotiating resources off the table, and you can't bring them back easily. But what this really brought to mind for me over the weekend in particular is what's been missing from this conflict. And it's a resource, a conflict resource that's often misunderstood: cyber operations. When you think back to Stuxnet Operation Olympic Games in Natanz, what was really effective about that was how little effect it had. It's often been criticized by the conflict folks. It barely left a mark. It only bought 6 or 9 months or whatever. Well, if you're thinking in direct action terms, yeah, that's a problem. It didn't blow up the building. But if you're looking at it as a resource for buying time for diplomacy, for enabling further negotiation, moderate escalation that still leaves you wiggle room, it was outstanding for that. Where has cyber been here, right? Cyber is not a great direct action tool. It's not a war tool in the classic sense. It doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't break things. You know, as soldiers like to say, it doesn't kill people or blow stuff up. And right now, that's the value in it. If we were to see some form of offensive cyber operations that can, you know, for lack of a better term, give a quick slap here and there just to say, hey, we can do this. We're allowing it to stand. You know, we're not blowing up your capabilities. We're not going to torture your people by blowing up a desalination plant. But we can do things to wake you up. That enables further negotiation. That enables some useful, measured, and impermanent escalation, which I think has been in short supply.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that leads nicely into this next topic here, where we're seeing the mobilization of relatively smaller number of troops, but bigger than I think maybe in some other estimates. But we're seeing the Marine Expeditionary Unit, we're seeing the 82nd Airbornes. I mean, these are parts of these immediate rapid force or reaction force. What are your, I'd like to get the group's thoughts on what we're thinking, either ties to this freeing up movement in the strait. Is it central to Carg Island? I mean, what are we thinking in terms of where we're going with these mobilization efforts?
Look, I think there's a clear signal being sent to the regime, and that's going back to what I said earlier: escalate to de-escalate. If you look at the Trump administration's approach over the last couple of years with Iran, he has not shied away from turning up the heat on the regime, but I think he's probably done the best he could to get a negotiated or some sort of a settled outcome from the regime before he escalates. And each and every time the regime has not performed, so he has no option but to. So if he's talking about putting pressure on Iran to close the strait, I'm sorry, to keep the straits open, and Iran is not relenting, and they're disparaging or blowing off the administration, for him to have an effective carrot and stick diplomacy, he's going to have to show the stick. In this case, between the 82nd Airborne and the Marine assets that are being deployed in theater, I think he's definitely showing what the stick is going to look like. Now, does that lead to boots on the ground? Again, this is just me speculating, but I don't see a scenario where we're deploying hundreds of thousands of boots into Iran to make a march on Tehran. That's something that none of us wants. I think there's any sane strategist thinks that's a good idea. But is there a scenario where you could see forces deployed onto Carg Island to hold that asset? 90+% of Iran's energy exports come off of that island. So to hold that island and to preserve the infrastructure, I think potentially starts shutting off the main source of funds for the regime, but also keeps the infrastructure intact. That when we do have regime change and we do have someone sane that we can negotiate with, we can hand those assets back to the people. And then if you look at what's happening in the Gulf right now, in the Straits particularly, that there isn't a systemic blockade of dhows and naval vessels that are blocking traffic. There aren't mines in the main corridor that are sinking ships. They're using the threat of drones and rocket attacks from the coastline to disrupt that flow of ships. So is there a scenario where we'd have actually boots on the ground in a very limited capacity in the southern part of Iran to hold that turf to help eliminate and eradicate and react quickly to the bunkers and not the bases, but the bunkers and the infrastructure the Iranians have built for years for this kind of conflict? That is a plausible scenario. So that, I think, is potentially the direction we're going with. And I think before the president initiates that, this is again another effort to try to get to a deal. But I think he's also smart enough to realize who he's dealing with right now is not a sane counterparty negotiator. I mean, look at they took Arakchi off the stage, who was the person that the team was negotiating with. I hate to say it, a somewhat well respected, I guess, diplomat in the foreign policy circles, and they replaced him with Ghalibaf, a hardline, 100% pragmatic conservative, but he has, I think, often been the regime's candidate in prior elections for president. So are we really dealing with somebody who's gonna find common ground? No. So I think that's the direction we're going right now.
Wow. Okay, Hamlet. Once again,
over to you, Yanni.
Yeah, thanks. Pass over. Look, I think again, I have to. Although by training, I'm a strategist in the U.S. military sense. I think I find myself most of the time explaining how the other side thinks, and I'll tell you that I say that because what Hamlet described, and quite frankly, the way most people are describing the two Marine Expeditionary Units, one of which is likely close, the other one is still quite some steam away, and the 82nd Ready Brigade. These are, if you add them in total, all three elements are probably 6,000-7,000, light infantry with a lot of capabilities and a lot of air power. But in terms of what they can do, can they hold terrain for some time? Yeah. Can they assist in maritime passage? If they put them on ships, the Marines especially. Okay, I don't know the plans for the 82nd. I don't even want to second guess it, right? I mean, that's our DoD and Department of War. There's some plans. On the other side, however, I think they're saying, welcome, bring it. They want people on the ground. They want people to get bloodied. They understand that, casualties, they don't care about their casualties. They're martyrs. But our casualties matter. And I think that the perception here is that we're just going to escalate because at one point they're going to say uncle. And in reality, I cannot emphasize how the persona of David versus Goliath is featured super high in the IRGC. Mm-hmm. You could say writ large to the Persian culture or a lot, but their original sin of them fighting against the bigger enemy in the Iran-Iraq war, the concept of the Islamist internationalism, the exporting of the revolution, fighting basically the larger foe, the Zionist American enemy. It's all centered on the David versus Goliath concept. So I think they'd welcome it. And of course, what we also seem to miss, and maybe Tom can actually highlight this as our commercial guy, is that Iran is still making money. Of course, they're taking a lot of hits and infrastructure, but part of their negotiation strategy is that we want reparations and we want money to pay for stuff. I mean, don't get into a bargaining war with an Iranian. You're likely bring an Iranian friend that can handle the negotiations for you because they're a master at this. So I think that they're still making money. And recent, I don't remember if it was Financial Times or Bloomberg, highlighted that they're still pushing about $140 million every month, and they're making more money in March than they made in February. So let's not underestimate that they're still getting their stuff through. It's just that, we're not getting ours. So I think, again, look at how they're expecting this. To them, it's an ambush. To us, it's a, escalate to de-escalate.
Yep.
The economic strain to the extent they are, right, needs to fit within the concept of tolerance as well. So there are a few things, Yanni, you mentioned. I mean, first, any frictional cost that comes with bringing cash in via export, that frictional cost will probably wind up above what they need to charge. So the notion that increased cost is leading to reduced returns for them, it's complicated. There's some sort of markup for any additional cost to export. That way they can make the money they need to. Their trading partners are probably, if not sympathetic, at least willing to enable for their own purposes. So that means probably some tolerance for a limited premium above traditional market pricing to allow them to continue trading. Okay, easy enough. Additionally, even if export volume goes down, export pricing going up would lead to potential increase in revenues as well. So what we have here is the sort of dynamic where we're not going to really choke them off in the traditional sense, unless you get to certain extreme ends of the range, right? And when you take that entire dynamic into an environment that's had to deal with sanctions for quite a long time, that's had to deal with limited international economic engagement, with some degree of enforced isolationism, and then finally the pain they can inflict on surrounding states that need access to Hormuz as well. Mm-hmm. All of that adds up to a pretty complicated economic chessboard where it's very difficult for either party to just straight win.
One thing that Tom mentioned that I think is very important. This is not a case of ceasefire and it's over. Regardless of the U.S. 15-point plan or the Iranian 7-point plan, these are starting points, right? These are starting points, and we have to think about what's going to happen afterwards. Already, the UAE is looking, and Saudi has been thinking about this for a while. Pipelines to Oman bypass Hormuz. Yep. They're looking at alternative pipelines. Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 days ago highlighted in a small briefing to the international journalists that he's thinking that at the end of this, there's a pipeline going from Saudi through Israel up the trunk into Europe or to the ports of Israel for export. There are other plans being considered in terms of alternatives to Strait of Hormuz. But I think that there's also another part of this, that the Gulf states, particularly Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi, they're looking at these like the state of constant threat is upon them. The idea that Iran, whatever Iran is after the ceasefire, will still have a capability of inflicting pain on them. So. Yep. I think at some point we need to talk about how do we approach this from the day after, the years after, and the new structure that companies and countries and even strategists need to look at it, because I don't think that any of us, to include myself or the president of the U.S. has said so, really envisioned exactly what's been happening. So we're all going to have to adjust.
Yeah. That's a hard thing, because I think society in general has been conditioned into consuming news in 15, 20-second TikToks and YouTubes and can't think past 2 weeks. So when President Trump comes out and says this is going to be a 4 to 6 week or 6 to 8 operations, 2 weeks later, people are bitching and moaning about, well, when is this going to end? Well, it may not anytime in the near future. Now, this then gets kind of spun up into, oh, no, this is another forever war. Well, it is going to be a forever conflict, probably not, but is it going to resolve itself in the near future? Probably not. Are we looking at 2003 style Iraq invasion where we're stuck in quagmire for 20 years? God, I hope not, but this is not going to resolve itself in 4 to 6 weeks. This is going to be a sustained effort here. There could be a scenario where in 4 to 6 weeks, the conventional piece drops off, but this asymmetric, irregular, cognitive piece, this economic warfare piece, on how do you suffocate the regime and give enough room for somebody sane to rise up and take the regime out from the inside. That's going to take a while. It's not 4 to 6 weeks. It's not going to be over by May. Is it going to be over by the summer? Is it going to be over by the next election? Who knows? I mean, you can't think that way, but we're being almost conditioned to do so. And this is where messaging is so critical. The regime, they studied and they've collaborated with the Russian and the Chinese playbook. They're trying to use any negative piece of economic or cultural data to spin it up and run with it and make this a disaster for the West, because their ability to fight the West and the U.S. and Israel toe to toe is growing limited. Their ability to fight us in an asymmetric battle using cognitive warfare, irregular warfare, and economic warfare as foundational kind of battlefields or realms is I don't say endless, but it's not giving up anytime soon. And Yanni, to your point, I think they are welcoming troops or boots on the ground, because for them that becomes a not only a target they can reach out and hit a lot easier, but I think they're relying on that for additional fodder to kind of fuel the anti-war, anti-Israel, anti-U.S. Narrative. And that's something I think we've got to be very cognizant of before we do pull that trigger. And if we do, make sure we understand this is coming.
Yeah, I think attaching timelines to things, it's a hot button issue, but it's one of the biggest, like you watch analysis on pick a news outlet or a channel. I mean, that's like one of the biggest questions, especially for retired senior military folks, is like, what does it look like? Give me a timeline. What is, and I think you're right. They utilize that as fodder to leverage the people against the administration's choices here. The next question here that I think is important to cover are the insurance implications. Tom, I'd like to start with you on this. Kind of thinking through, I mean, how is that shaping the conflict? And is there strategy to kind of how the Iranians are leveraging those implications?
It's interesting. So looking at the insurance aspect of this does feel a bit like a wag the dog scenario, where a lot has been made over it, and insurance is not shaping the conflict. Let's just be really clear. Yeah, the conflict is affecting the insurance industry, but not vice versa. So when you hear about, we need insurance to get vessels through the Strait of Hormuz again, we're not quite there yet. Insurance matters in a conflict area once the area is secure enough to enable traffic and commerce again, right? So if vessels are afraid of rockets, having insurance isn't going to help. I mean, as a cyclist, I have health insurance. I still wear a helmet. Obvious reasons, right? Physical safety is not necessarily mitigated by economic security. Now, once we have some amount of either control or at least security through the Strait of Hormuz, and there's still risk, then yes, insurance makes a difference. But my understanding is we're not quite there yet. Additionally, there's been a lot of talk about how the insurance product and the insurance industry responded to the threat in the region, and it's been a bit muddled, especially in the mainstream press. So the insurance industry didn't say, oh no, war is coming, we're canceling. This is actually baked into insurance, marine insurance products, and the Lloyd's environment, right? You've got the Joint War Committee regularly designates conflict areas and says, hey, this is now a conflict area. You need to leave within 72 hours or you lose coverage. So basically, you're insured given a certain amount of time to exit the area at risk. Should you choose not to, you can gain a specific form of insurance for that limited period where you're at higher risk. And yes, if you're in a conflict zone, the product becomes more expensive. This is not new. This is not unusual. This did not arise through this latest conflict. This has been around for quite a long time. That being said, we've got, oil going through the Strait of Hormuz. It's 20% of the world's oil passes through. People get nervous about it. We're looking at thinking, in 15-minute or even within 2-week timeframes. And of course, the cost of gas, the price of the pump in the United States is probably the greatest lever economically at the household level we could possibly use, or at least speak to in the public domain. So the notion that insurers are making more money on short notice via a conflict while you're paying more at the pump, it makes for a great narrative. But there's a lot going on there that the soundbite does not include. And the actual price of war coverage going through is not necessarily as severe as people think.
I'm not going to cover Tom's expert opinion on this, but I will say that who's going to pay for it? It's us. At the end of the day, the increase, I mean, look, I go to buy Leadenhall Market and the insurance people in London all the time. And, at 3:00 on February 27th, they were at the pub just outside Leadenhall Market. And on the 2nd of March, they were outside the pub. I mean, some things don't really change that much in terms of the insurance, but at the end of the day, the price point is going up and we're going to pay for it. I think LNG is going to be a real issue, and the shortages are only just now starting to be felt around the world. The last LNG ship that left before the conflict started is about to dock. And so what happens after that, you're going to start seeing 4-day weeks in some countries. Some countries are shifting back to their coal power plants. There's a lot of shifting, and some can adjust better than others. But at the end of the day, we're all going to feel it and we're all going to pay for it.
Let's be clear, though. This isn't due to war pricing for marine hull. This is due to the absence of vessel traffic. I mean, regardless of what's happening on my street. Yeah.
No, exactly. You're absolutely right. But let's also not, again, I think of the day after. The day after is not like, okay, everything's done, the risk is gone, price points go back to normal. No, stuff lingers. And ship owners, by the way, are also going to be, concerned, and they're going to also raise the prices of freight in order to make sure that this covers down. So I think all in all, we're not. Let me just back out so I can, we can move on to the next point. Economics are serious issues that we need to look at very, clearly, but also analytically. It's not the sound bites. I think that you need to do the ledger in order to see where everything is going and how important this is.
Agreed.
The next big thing to tackle here are the economic ramifications of Carg Island specifically. And that also ties into the military, which we touched on a bit, but maybe we can dive a little deeper into the military implications of Carg Island. So how are these points tied, and where do we think we're at? Hamlet, let's start with you.
Look, I think as I said earlier, Carg represents a symbolic, but also a key node to hold. There's a reason, I think, why the administration chose to attack, as I think a Trump paraphrase President Trump, we blew up every military asset on the island, but left the infrastructure intact. That's because I think we want to control that infrastructure. And if we can, to the best, try to restrict flows of income into the coffers of the regime as much as we can, but also protect it so we can hand it back to the people. 90+% of I think Iran's exports rely on Carg Island. So if you control that node, in theory, you can start putting some significant economic pressures on Iran. We don't want to march on Tehran. What we want to do is we want to continue to degrade and decapitate the regime leadership and infrastructure. less than 10% of the Iranian population is pro-regime. That's not to say that number is dwindling significantly. You continue to suffocate the regime from an economic standpoint and add to their inability to wage economic warfare or conventional warfare. At some point, you get to a tipping point where the average rank and file, Artesh, military, security forces, heck, even some of the IRGC guys in the Basij who are like, you know, we're done with this. And do you see then an uprising where they come after the regime? And if you look at the last number of attacks that have happened, the surgical strikes that have taken out senior leaders within the Quds Force and the regime, this isn't happening because of triangulation data and tech. That's kind of the headlines of the first couple of weeks. This is happening because the neighbor, the relative, the friend, the sub-commander is like, hey, man, 3 o'clock in the morning, they're going to be in that building. Go get it. So you're starting to see those fissures and cracks form right now. And the more economic pressure we put, I think it further not only destabilizes the regime, but also hinders their ability to pay proxies.
Hamlet, I've been curious about the uprising discussions. You know, when you look at the historical literature on this sort of issue, violent protests and civil unrest come down to basically the opportunity cost associated with inaction, right?
Yep.
You know, at what point is it worth rising up, risking my life, my livelihood, not being able to feed my family? So I guess I'm curious about you know, at what point does that happen? Because it's a pretty high threshold.
Yeah.
And then the next question is, uprising is good, but without a what comes next.
Yeah.
Uprising, you know, so basically, is there, you know, showing my age and my regional focus, is there a Václav Havel or a Lech Walesa or a Dubček type movement waiting in the wings?
That's a complicated answer. The cost benefit of what do I have to live for? I think we saw that in January.
Well, not so much what do I have to live, but the opportunity cost associated with inaction. Like at what point do people say, I am in such dire straits, I'm willing to stand up to the regime, you know, with staying power, right? So January was one thing. We're talking about regime threatening scale.
Yeah, I think January was there, because if you look at prior protests and prior uprisings in Iran, which have been almost regular since 1999, these protests and uprisings have grown in scale every several years, and I think they hit a tipping point at the end of December where the people across the board like, we've had it. The economy is cratered. The currency is worthless. You guys have totally screwed up, and you're enriched yourself at every step of the way. We want you out. So for the first time, you had en masse people in the streets. They were done with the regime, and the regime's traditional tactic of paintballs and tear gas and batons wasn't working, and they turned bloody, and they began to become very violent and kill their own people. I think to a certain extent, the people kind of went to ground, because if I have to be critical of anything with the Trump administration, in January said, we're coming. Well, the Iranian people are like, oh, well, the Americans are coming, let's go. And sure enough, they got slaughtered. But now that we're in theater, I think that changes the calculus to a certain point. Do I see a scenario where in the coming weeks or months, you're going to see a re-escalation of people taking to the streets and taking over? Yeah, I do. And it kind of happened in 1979. And oddly enough, March of 1979 is when the military said, hey, you know what, we're not going to fire on the people anymore. They dropped their arms. And very quickly, the regime changed and the Shah was gone. Now, unfortunately, just like 79, back then, most of the country wanted hope and change. They wanted a different future. They didn't necessarily want the theocratic Islamic Republic to take over. And what I fear is we are going to get regime change. Regime change is here. Khamenei is dead. Mujtaba is, God knows where he's at. So we are going to get a new regime regardless. But I think if you have wholesale expulsion of the hardline establishment, I don't think we're guaranteed to have Pahlavi or some sort of a Western-style democracy by September in power in Tehran. I think what we may end up is a little less worse than what we have, and that's like almost like a Putin-style oligopoly or kleptocracy of not necessarily hardliners, but I would say regime-adjacent families that want to consolidate power and control. Okay, so they may not be hardline from an ideological standpoint, and that's good, but it's not going to be necessarily a Western-style democracy. But to be blunt, I don't think that matters, because right now the near-term objective, my guess, is this isn't about turning Iran into the United States and a free democracy. We hope we can get there, but the near-term objective is taking a critical chess piece off the board that benefits China and Russia, and that's Iran. So I think we would take that deal in a heartbeat, and I think there's probably power centers inside Iran that are starting to realize that they can rise up and eliminate the regime from within. There is a deal to be had.
Jackie, if I can just, let me just throw in a couple of things. First of all, in full transparency, Hamlet and I have a bet on Karg Island, so I'm going to collect, and because I don't think that that's the target. I think that as a strategist, you're looking at nearly 700 kilometers from the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz in transit along the Iranian coastline. I mean, why don't we just get the paint out and put the bullseye on a lot of things on the way through? I don't see it. I think there may be a Karg Island aspect to all this, but I don't see the sands of Iwo Jima kind of and the planting of the flag in Karg Island. There may be other exquisite means of turning off the pump. I mean, or there may be other ways that they introduce certain smaller forces that get in there to do this. But it's kind of being built up in the West, and which may be okay, because the Department of War is saying, go ahead, build it up however you want, head fake, let's go the other way. Yeah. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, and to Tom's point of the dissent, I think that if Khomeini, the first leader, supreme leader, a lot of people kind of consider him the philosopher king, like he was not just some cleric with all religious. He was using religion, but he had ideas, and he was political and a visionary. I say it with visionary, not in a good sense, but yep. He created something. And Khomeini was the first republic. Khomeini, the second republic, was a builder. I mean, he created this structure of this, axis of resistance, the exporting of the revolution, supersized. We don't know what the Third Republic is. I think that there is a lot of IRGC leadership kind of leading the charge. I think by the system, Mujtaba is the leader, but again, his influence and his impact, I think that's not for us. Maybe the intelligence services know a lot more about him, but I think that we're going to have to adapt to something. One thing's for sure, I think whatever happens next, you're going to have an even more brutal regime dealing with any dissent than what you had previously. There is zero chance in my mind that they're going to try to let's just hug them. Let's just use Nerf guns instead of bullets. There is no way. It's going to be an absolute brutal clampdown. And that's what people are kind of, measuring right now. Is this the right time? I think Iranians are super brave, and the Iranian people have proven their bravery, but they've also seen that nobody came to their aid. Yeah. And they, in 11, in 18, 19, or even January, they went out, got killed, and no change. So to say now, well, we're in theater, to Hamlet's point, what does that mean? It's not like we've not walked away from certain places before. It's not like we've not just, not done something after they decided they go. It's so I think we have to be careful. An indicator, and I'll finish with this, an indicator that I'm looking at Tom, is let me see internet usage go up. Okay, let me see how is the U.S., other people, other allies supplying systems that allow protesters to coordinate and share and kind of get themselves going. If we start seeing that, I think we're closer to an action point. There's so much to talk about. I mean, you just like took out the can here. So, but for sure, one thing that I like to throw out, chum in the water. I think that in what happens afterwards, and Hamlet, Jackie, even and Tom, what happens afterwards? I think that we need to look at drones and the concept of defense against drones, and Ukraine, and the lessons learned that we've had from Ukraine, and their intent and opening to help and export their knowledge to the Gulf. I think all these things are going to play big in whatever happens next.
Agreed.
Yeah, to your point, I think a lot of what's been bouncing around in the defense and national security industrial base relative to cheap cost, I mean, that's been highlighted, right? Like, this is stuff that people who live in this environment have been thinking about for a long time, and we've been talking about the lessons learned from Ukraine, and now we're living it. So I think if anything, that's something that'll be we'll see some major shifts in Department of War in that regard. One last question for the group as we kind of get close to time here. And this is kind of a bigger question, I guess, is being that we're working in concert with Israel here. I'm curious your take on we talked before in the last part of the series about tipping points. Is there a point with the economic warfare that's being leveraged by Iran where the implications are greater to the U.S. than what Israel is either experiencing or willing to endure, that this becomes disjointed in some way, and then that impacts missions? I mean, Tom, I'm happy to field that to you to start. And kind of on the horn.
Willing to endure is the most interesting part of what you said. It's not about magnitude of event. You know, famously, the U.S. is flanked by two oceans and two good neighbors, so we don't endure much. You know, what you want about, you know, digital connectivity and flights and everything else, we do not endure much. We don't, you know, we haven't had, you know, actually, you know, full-scale war on our land. We haven't had the threat of it from an adjacent player. I mean, you can make cases for anything we've used as a metaphor for war over the past 80, 85 years, but we have not had war on our shores. We're hard to touch. And that's led to a certain amount of prosperity, which has led to comfort, which means we are not necessarily willing to endure a ton because we've never had to. And in all honesty, when you think from perspective of economic growth, why would you want to, right? We don't need to endure, privation to toughen ourselves up. That's completely counter to our approach to markets, economy, and U.S. culture and philosophy and thinking, right? We are full on in economic growth, which means any impediment to that we feel, and the more impediment we feel, the less tolerance we have for it. So when you look at states in and around the Gulf, including Israel, I think the ability and willingness to endure more, either because of historical privation, historical threat, or near-term and medium-term perceived existential threat, perceived or actual, or perceived can be good enough. Actual, of course, is what it is. The ability to endure is greater. So, Jackie, I would not be surprised to see that sort of dislocation you mentioned occur, and with scale, where we're enduring a lot more than we're willing to, because Israel is willing to endure what it will. And that will lead to challenges in terms of the nature, extent of U.S. involvement and duration of U.S. involvement in the conflict.
Yeah, Hamlet, how about your take on that?
Yeah, I think Tom nailed it. Our level of ability to absorb discomfort is, I think it's there if we're really pushed, but on surface it is definitely not there. I have some very hawkish, red-meated, red-blooded American friends here in Florida, and week 2, like, hey man, this is BS. Gas is up 50 cents. What's going on here? I'm like, really? We're 2 weeks into trying to take off a regime that was marching towards nuclear weapons that could have a much more debilitating impact on gas prices than a couple of bucks in your comfort. So, but that narrative is something that, again, I think the Chinese, the Russians, and Iranians are going to dump a ton of gasoline on. You want to look at it as an indicator of possible cognitive warfare and propaganda. When the hard left and the hard right agree on something and are parroting each other's talking points, they're either onto something or they're being spoon-fed some narrative. So when Tucker Carlson and the hard left are on the same page, that to me is an issue. Because again, they're fueling that dissension from within. And to Yanni's point, yes, is there a military benefit of having some tactical short-term boots on the ground in Iran to stabilize and help force open the strait? Yeah. Does that fall us into a trap where the island is booby-trapped and the forces now could march against our forces and create a downward spiral of putting more assets, and that fuels the cognitive warfare messaging? 100%. That's a threat and a risk. So that's a weak point right now for us. A lot of people at first didn't see the existential threat of why did we go into Iran? Iran was not about to invade us, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I get it. But that's a message that's been being amplified significantly. And like I said, this war is not going to end in 4 to 6 weeks. Sustained air campaigns may end, but the irregular aspect of it, I think, is here for the near term. And once there's regime change, don't discount the fact that there's a couple of 100,000 hardliners that might lay down their turbines and they may lay down their arms and melt into the populace. But that's a pretty rich pool of eventual insurgents that'll attack whatever establishment that replaces the regime and put Iran into a significant bit of a quagmire. So those are the threats and the issues I think we're worried about at this point. Or I'm sorry, we're not thinking about at this point.
I'll jump in quickly because I know we're running into time. Look, whether you're a military strategist or you're a strategist for a high net worth family or you know, as Hamlet and Tom are, for venture funds, you want to minimize your vulnerabilities when you're considering something. And when you start a new venture, you want to make sure that you've done all you could to minimize vulnerabilities. Exposing our ground troops, does that limit or minimize our vulnerabilities of Strait of Hormuz, or has it exposed us to more vulnerabilities? Does entering Iran proper or an island, does that actually cause them to back up, or does it cause them to lash out? And when they lash out, the desalination plants and the power plants and everything else that's at risk, is that actually a higher vulnerability than their own ability to say, okay, I don't have, if we hit power plants in Iran, they're not going to sit there and cry because we hit power plants, right? They don't care if the people are going to suffer. They're going to say this is a crime against humanity. It's a violation of convention of law or whatever, law of arms. They're going to bring it back to us. I'm not saying we shouldn't do something. I'm just saying consider the vulnerabilities in every action that you have. I think that there's also other opportunities. You mentioned Israel. Their measure of where this ends may be different than ours. And I don't begrudge them. They're a sovereign state and they have their interests. We need to have our distinct interests and marching areas. Their arrow interceptors are going down. The Ukraine's Patriots missiles and interceptors are going down. We're going to have to balance where do we want to put priorities. The other imbalance is $30,000 drone, $2 million interceptor. And one of the greatest issues is the fact that our vulnerabilities that a lot of these conflicts have exposed is that the industrial, power, the capacity for production is very different. They can pump out Radio Shack drones in the back of their mom's kitchen, and we don't have the capability to produce products at scale quickly to get out forward. Our production lines are measured in years, not in months or days. So we're going to have to rethink of a lot of issues, and also other concepts. I mean, talk about trashing the UN has been a favorite pastime for a lot of us. Okay, but ironically, the UN resolution was the thing that forced Ayatollah Khomeini to take that poison chalice, as he called it, to end the Iran war. So maybe we use outdated, humored and characterized as inept ways when it suits us. The last thing I'll throw out there, and I think I should have covered it earlier, but Hamlet mentioned something, the concept of how do we respond to forever wars. I think that this is a great snippet and a soundbite, but anybody who's really studied anything about history, Plato's "Only the dead have seen the end of war," and I'm paraphrasing obviously, is something that we need to really pay attention to. Whatever's happening right now is a phase. The ceasefire, end of hostilities, it doesn't matter. Lebanon's Hezbollah was created by IRGC guys, and they're not going to not hit back at Israel for as long as the two shall live. Russia is not going to stop wanting to go after Ukraine as long as Putin lives, and then whoever comes back 30, 40 years afterwards, because the Rus and Ukraine have been at it for a long time. I mean, these are enduring issues. The gimmick of forever war, great talking point, but it's not real.
Yeah.
It will always have wars.
Yeah, those are some great points to end on. I mean, really thinking through.
I know. I know the uplifting points. I'm just I'm an upper, not a downer.
But it showcases how it's all tied back, like the economic implications ties to the information operations, which ties to and therefore is and potentially mobilizes some of these kinetic options here. So we are at time, but I think we have still a lot on the table that we can lead into next week. I mean, we touched on supply chains. I think that maybe is an important topic that we think about and moving into week 5. But any closing thoughts for the group? Tom, let's start with you.
My closing thought is it seems the conflict seems to be screaming out for an offensive cyber component at this point, not to inflict damage, but to do the contrary.
Yeah, great point. Hamlet, how about you?
Yeah, I think global peace or Middle East peace is not going to break out anytime soon. But I think on the backside of the rough waters we're navigating right now, I think we're in for a very bright future. We just need to get through this piece. I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. From North Africa through the Levant, through the Arabian Gulf, and the peninsula, and even with the Iranian people, the Middle East, I think, is getting to the point where they're done with this. They want a bright future that's driven on secular, collaborative economics and taking care of or capitalizing on demographics that are in their favor. The impediment to that has been the Iranian regime. You want to see a bright light? Lebanon. They moved yesterday to expel the Iranian ambassador. Again, Yanni and I have a lot of bingo cards. Did not have that on mine. So that to me is a sliver of brightness that as the regime weakens, so does their grip in the region.
Yeah, positive note. That's great. Yanni?
In order to end on a positive note, I'll just hold my comments, but I will say this: please comment on the channel. We all look at them, and I think that we have a lot of material for next week already.
Yep.
But it helps if we get your thoughts and comments, and throughout the week as you watch it, put your comments as we get closer. We covered some of the material on this podcast that were in the comments. So thanks for holding this to the Irregular Warfare Initiative, and Tom, welcome to the bunch, and Hamlet, I'll keep on seeing your ugly mug throughout the week.
Love you, brother.
Done cashing in on those bets. All right. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. And from the Irregular Warfare Initiative, thanks to everyone watching today. We're looking forward to the next one.
Great. Thanks, everybody.